As a political economist, where do you see the United States right now?
If you are going to come up with an action plan to undermine all of the strengths of this country, I think the current administration is getting it just about right. This situation is absolutely horrifying. We've got real problems, and we've got a government that is either ignoring them or actively doing the opposite of what we need.
But many of the economic things that happen don't have immediate ramifications. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, years to pan out.
Like the tariffs, for example. From an economic viewpoint, they are definitely not a favorable move, but is it going to cause an economic crisis tomorrow? Maybe not.
If you could rewrite one U.S. economic policy from scratch tomorrow, like a total, complete reboot, which one needs it the most and why?
It's a great question because
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bill Cancel here, the host of the Weekly BC2 show. I am very excited to have as my next guest a very incredibly smart gentleman. So let's do a little bit of a bio. He's an Il-Han New Professor of Asian Studies, Director of the Political Economy Program, Professor of Political Science and Political Economy at University of California, Berkeley. He holds a BA from Princeton University and a PhD in Political Science from UC Berkeley. His research focuses on comparative political economy, regulation, market governance, and particularly the political economy of advanced industrialized countries, with a strong emphasis on Japan. Some of his selected major works include Marketcraft, How Government Makes Markets Work, Oxford 2018, Japan Remodeled, How Government and Industry Are Reforming Japanese Capitalism, Cornell 2006, and Free Markets, More Rules, Regulatory Reform in Advanced Industrial Countries, Cornell 1966, winner of the Masayoshi Ohira Memorial Prize. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Steven K Vogel to the show. Mr. Vogel, how are you, Professor?
I'm great. It's great to be with you.
So, Professor, I was very happy in the agreement to find out that you are not an economist, but you are a political
Absolutely
economist.
not.
But could you do me a favor for the audience and from my own perspective? I think I kind of know what that means, but could you kind of elaborate the differences between the two? Because I think it's important to start the conversation that way.
Sure. I think of political economy not just as a blend or like a halfway house between politics and economics, but as a more holistic integration. It's looking at the problems of our world from an interdisciplinary perspective. So obviously you have to understand the economics, but you also have to understand social context, geography. It's a more holistic interdisciplinary approach. And if you think about like the biggest challenges of our time, like climate change, for example, you can't even think about climate change without thinking about both, the economic costs and benefits,
absolutely.
and politically, how are you going to do anything? And one does not really work without the other. So we kind of feel like that's true of most of our big problems, like inequality, public health. These are all issues that really require a more holistic view. And that's what we try to do in political economy.
In political economy, the holistic approach that you're talking about, I think is absolutely brilliant. And I would definitely support that approach. But why do you think that so many people may not think that? Do you feel that so many people just want to target specific things instead of just looking at a holistic approach? Is it easier to do it that way, or are people too afraid of doing it holistically, I guess is my question.
Yeah, or they think they've got the best way. It can be both, right? So in the case of economics, sometimes economists will kind of like filter out the politics because they want to look at a specific relationship. If you do this, is it's going to increase inflation or is it going to decrease inflation? So it's not that they don't realize that politics or society doesn't exist out there, but they kind of want to filter them out in order to like focus on a particular causal relationship. For political scientists, I think it's actually something that's different. It's more like feeling like there's a division of labor. We're good at as a politics, we're going to leave the economics to the economists, which I can also understand. But I think, as people want to understand the full picture, we kind of have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Interesting. So one of the words I learned while doing your bio today is the word market craft. Have no idea what it means. So why don't you please explain to everybody what you mean by market craft and what does it particularly mean in our current environment, if you can?
So I think of market craft sort of like statecraft. Statecraft, as we say, like this is one of the core functions of a government, is its foreign policy, its relations with other countries. And what I'm arguing in this book, Marketcraft, that markets are always governed. There's no such thing as a free market. The government is always shaping the market. It can do that well or badly. But that is a core function of government. Sometimes we don't realize that. So I'm just trying to highlight that point. But to get to your question about like, okay, well, what does that really mean in concrete terms? One way I like to think about it is like, what was the greatest economic success story of the last 50 years and what was the greatest failure? I would submit the greatest success story was the digital revolution, and the greatest failure was the global financial crisis. And if you think about it, both of those are products of American market craft. So that gives you a sense of the stakes. Like when it goes well, it goes really badly. And so I'm just using that as a way of conveying the stakes. But in concrete terms, like what could that actually means all kinds of government regulation and also private market governance, antitrust policy or financial regulation or intellectual property rights. These are all elements of market craft.
So just let me take a step back for a second there. You mentioned the worst thing being the financial collapse that happened to us many years ago. But I want to go back to your earlier point, talking about the holistic approach. Do you think that had we adopted a holistic approach before that, we would have avoided the financial collapse?
Yes. A case study in failed market governance or failed market craft. And I think one of the problems was that we were looking at it too piecemeal and not looking, for example, at systemic risk, not looking at the interrelationship between what's going on in the macroeconomy and the banks. And there's a famous moment when Alan Greenspan pretty much confessed as much. He was at a congressional hearing, and the chair of the committee said, "You have this ideology that free markets were going to work best, and that ideology led you to make mistakes that led to they contributed. Let's not overemphasize. They contributed to the financial crisis." And he was all kind of, yeah, we had a problem in terms of how we, he thought that financial institutions that market forces, would impose discipline, to the extent that they wouldn't make excessively risky choices. And he's like, well, it turns out that wasn't true.
Exactly. So back to the market craft. You argue in market craft that markets don't exist without government rules. So when politicians say government should stay out of the economy, what are they getting wrong?
That for a lot of the most important choices, there actually is not that option. So, for example, the corporation, which is like the heart of capitalism, most corporations in the United States have limited liability, which means that investors can only lose the money that they put in. This is something that makes stock markets work and much more vibrant and more dynamic than they would be if you didn't. But the government can't just say, "Oh, I'm not going to make a decision about that. I'll let the government decide." Or, something as kind of like nitty gritty as non-compete clauses, which are being battled over right now, which is where a firm has a contract with their workers that says that you can't go and work for my competitor after you leave me. Right. Again, the government can't say, "Oh, we're just going to leave that up to you to decide." They've got to go one way or the other. And so my point is that there's a whole spectrum of choices that are really that. They're not about, is the government going to be in or the government going to be out? They're about like how, right? What is the government going to do? And so that's really how we should rethink these debates, that the idea that it's between the government and the market is misplaced. And also that the relationship between those two is often positive rather than negative. What I mean by that is that you need the government to make the market work as well as it can. So, for example, something like the New York Stock Exchange, like that's the essence of capitalism. But you wouldn't have a vibrant stock market if you didn't have corporate disclosure laws and trading rules and et cetera.
That's right.
So the rules actually augment the market, not constrain it. So that whole worldview just, I think, serves to confuse us rather than to enlighten us.
Okay. Let's talk about another buzzword. What do you mean by predistribution?
So predistribution, here the idea is that, okay, we have this inequality in the world. What should we do about it? I think the most common proposal is redistribution, which would be like increasing progressive taxes so that you tax the rich more than the poor, or welfare spending that would also disproportionately target people, who are more needy rather than everybody. That's redistribution. I've got nothing against redistribution, but I think that we should focus more on predistribution. Predistribution is the idea that instead of trying to let markets do their thing, create as much inequality as they can, and then we will kind of after the fact come in and kind of like try to patch that over by saying, okay, well, you've got too much and you've got too little, so we're going to kind of shift it. Instead of that, let's think more fundamentally about how we can make our society a fair market economy. And that means balancing power within the economy through some of these market rules that I talk about, and also public investment like public education. In other words, think about how could we get everybody in good shape at the starting line of economic competition, give them the capacity, to thrive in our economy. And so that would put the emphasis more on those two buckets I just mentioned, which is public investment and market regulation to balance power in the economy. And then, if that is successful, then you don't need to eliminate redistribution because you'd have a lot less inequality on the front end.
And again, I'm hearing everything that you're saying about suggestions and so on, but the same common denominator keeps coming back, which is a holistic approach.
Yep.
You are not, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Professor. I haven't heard you say yet that, you have to do this one thing or this two things. You mostly seem to be implying stop, look up here, and see how this all filters down, and then that's what you do.
That's right. You've got to define your goals first, and then you've got to think about the means. And part of what I'm saying with all of this stuff about market governance and market regulation is that if you realize that markets are inherently governed, then that market craft becomes a tool that can enable you to realize those goals.
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Let's talk about the U.S. and Japan for a minute. How similar are we economic-wise? How different are we? What's the strength and differences between each one? And who, if you think, has a little bit of an edge when it comes to how they handle the economy versus the other, and why? I threw a lot at you there. Sorry, I apologize.
No, that's great. So one way we characterize the difference is that we call Japan more of a coordinated market economy and the U.S. more of a liberal market economy. And what that means, if you kind of boil it down to its essence, is that the relationships between the different parties within the economy are more collaborative or coordinated or cooperative in the Japanese case, and they're more competitive in the U.S. case. So again, to try to be concrete, three of the core features of the Japanese model of the economy are the keiretsu, which are industry groups, the lifetime employment system, which means loyalty between workers and their employers, and what's called the main bank system, which is where companies typically work primarily with one bank, and there's kind of some loyalty. So the point is that those relationships are all long-time relationships, whereas in the U.S., it's much more arm's length and relationships. And when things get bad in the U.S., we lay off workers, or we cut our suppliers, or we look for a different financial model. Whereas in Japan, what they'll do is they'll reinforce those cooperative relationships and try to leverage them, to improve quality or cut costs or whatever it is they're trying to do. Another way of kind of looking at the difference that a lot of people use is the language of shareholders versus stakeholders, which is that the American corporation's primary duty is to maximize returns for shareholders. And in Japan, the primary duty of a corporation is to serve shareholders. Yes, absolutely. But a broader range of stakeholders, including the workers, the community, the suppliers, etc. So those are kind of two of the biggest differences. In terms of who has the edge, I think it depends on what we're looking at. So if we're talking about breakthrough innovation, or if we're talking about the speed with which companies can react to market changes, then I think that gives the edge to the United States. But if you're looking at the ability to make incremental improvements in manufacturing processes, that coordinated system of Japan, I would give that the edge. And I would also give Japan the edge in terms of just social stability, right? I mean, the U.S., you have there's a lot of hiring and firing and a lot of businesses coming in and out, which has its benefits, but it also has it takes a toll on society. And, there's a Japanese politician, a quote that just really has stuck with me, even though it's been a couple of decades since he said that. He said, if you give Japanese a choice, if you want to have a higher risk, higher return society or a lower risk, lower return society, they're going to pick the latter. And that's our job as politicians, is to give them what they want.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do. So I think that kind of encapsulates the key difference. I mean, Japan is amazing in the sense that people say that the economy has been stagnating for decades. You go to Japan and it doesn't look like that.
Right.
It's thriving. It's a society that works. The streets are clean. The trains come on time. So there's a lot to be said for that.
If you could, Professor, and I think you kind of alluded to it in what you just said, but just specifically, if there was one thing that you wish the U.S. could adopt tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. from the Japanese economy, what would that be? That would be a real game changer.
If we viewed corporations as public entities, I think that would be a game changer. But I mean by public entity, it means that it's an organization that is meant to maximize profits and maximize benefits to society.
Right.
It's not either or. It's, their mission is to try to figure out how to do both at the same time. And I'm not trying to disparage American executives. I think
no, understood.
But I'm sure there's plenty who see it that way.
Right.
But I do think that a kind of a change in worldview, where that those missions are merged rather than separated, I think would help us address a lot of our social problems, like climate change, or inequality. Corporations are part of the answer.
Okay. Thank you for that, sir. You've written about deregulation actually leading to more rules. What's the most misunderstood thing about deregulation in United States politics today?
The single most misunderstood thing about deregulation is that it actually happened. I.e., that regulations actually decreased. This was the subject of my dissertation. I didn't go in thinking that that's what I was going to discover. This was something I found out. I'm doing this research and I'm thinking, they're calling this a deregulation movement,
Right.
Yet the number of regulations is increasing as they deregulate. What's that about? And so it turns out there's actually a logical connection, right? Which is that the more competition you want to foster, the more regulation you need to foster that regulation. Now, that sounds contradictory, but it actually isn't, because businesses don't necessarily want to compete. And if you want to create competition, you have to create rules. Just to give one specific example, we broke up AT&T. That's what created, the internet that we know and love. That was the government coming in and doing that. And not only did they break it up, they required AT&T to lease their lines to their competitors, which is not what no company's going to want to do that.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
The government had to come in and force them to do that in order to create competition. And so that's just one example of the point I'm trying to make, which is that often you need more rules to create competition, because the rules are actually what creates the market.
Two more questions for you, my friend. As a political economist, where do you see the United States right now? Are you losing sleep? Are you comfortable? Are you concerned about the next few months? Where are you at?
I'm about as uncomfortable and about as concerned and about as sleepless as you could possibly get. If you are going to come up with an action plan to undermine all of the strengths of this country,
right,
I think the current administration is getting it just about right. They're moving us in the wrong direction in terms of destroying political institutions, destroying our civil service, which is one of our strengths, attacking our universities, attacking the press. One of our greatest strengths is our research, our scientific ability.
Yeah, it's gone. Yeah.
If we want to invent technology that will address the climate change crisis, we're going to need those capabilities. So, yeah, I think this situation is absolutely horrifying. I mean, we've got real problems, and we've got a government that is either ignoring them or actively doing the opposite of what we need.
Do you think I lied, the next question. Do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
Seems like it's been a long time, but we are less than 1 year into the second administration. And so, yes, it will get worse before it gets better.
My concern is that, please, I need an economist, political or otherwise, to agree with me on this. But many of these economic things that happen don't have immediate ramifications. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, years to pan out, right? You may be thinking right now things are not really that bad, but 6 months or 12 months from now, they can be pretty catastrophic.
Like the tariffs, for example, from an economic viewpoint, they are definitely not a favorable move. They're not going to help the American economy. They are on balance going to hurt the American economy. But is it going to cause an economic crisis tomorrow? Maybe not. So yes, I think we're headed to economic dark times, but it may or may not happen, for example, before the midterm elections.
Correct. I agree. My last question, I promise, Professor. If you could rewrite one U.S. economic policy from scratch tomorrow, like a total, complete reboot, which one needs it the most and why? I'll give you two.
That's great. Thank you. Are you going to give me two?
Yeah, I'll give you two if you want. You don't have to launch on one.
It's a great question because, I'm writing this piece on predistribution. So if I went with that article, yeah, you're going to have to give me 2.5, I guess. Comes out of that is we need stronger antitrust policy and we need labor regulation that empowers workers. That's the message of predistribution that I was talking about a moment ago. But I actually am going to have half contradict myself and say there's another area where I think we need dramatic change and could deliver results maybe even more quickly, which would be tax policy.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have a tax system that currently where the richest people in the country are paying less as a percentage of their income than those lower down, I mean, that's just crazy. One way to change the distribution of resources in our economy very rapidly would be to change the tax system, including a wealth tax.
Dr. Vogel, before you go, could you please, just for the guests again, I know I did in the bio, just reference your books so everybody can know where to buy them, where to find them, and so on and so forth?
Well, the latest one is called Marketcraft: How Governments Make Markets Work, and it comes from Oxford University Press.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else?
No, that's good. I've got a piece on predistribution that will be coming out from the Roosevelt Institute soon, but it's not out yet.
Very good. Professor, thank you so very much for your time. To the audience, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Everybody take care. We'll see you tomorrow morning for Momentum Monday.